I question if in the world there is another spot where salmon are in greater abundance, or taken with so little labor, as at the Kettle Falls on the Columbia River, and all streams emptying into Puget Sound, and the Fraser River and rivers north of it, through the Arctic Ocean salmon ascend in prodigious abundance. In the Fraser there are no obstructions as far as hope through the salmon ascent, hence the fishing is carried on by each village or family for themselves, and not by the combined labor of many. As on the Columbia, near the mouth of the river, large iron gaff hooks are generally used. With these ugly weapons, salmon are hooked into the canoes. Higher up, at the mouths of the Sumac, Chilliwack, and other tributary streams, they use a very ingenious kind of net, worked between two canoes, with large numbers of salmon are taken. Stages too are hung over the eddies from the rocks. Round nets are used at the cascades. On the Nanamo River, the Indians have a very ingenious contrivance for taking salmon by constructing a weir, but instead of putting baskets, they have a square place about 6 feet wide and 14 feet long, with white or light colored stones. This pavement is always on the lower side of the weir, leading to an opening. A stage is erected between two of these paved ways, where Indians lying on their stomachs can, in an instant, see if a salmon is traversing the white paved way. A long spear, barbed at the end, is held in readiness, and woe betide the adventurous fish that runs the gauntlet of this perilous passage. But the most curious contrivance I saw was at Johnson's Narrows. I have said salmon readily take a bait when in salt water. The Indians when fishing use two spears, one about 70 feet in length, the other shorter, having a barbed end. It is about 20 feet long. In a canoe thus equipped, favorable fishing grounds are sought, the Indians having the long spear being also provided with a small hollow cone of wood trimmed around its greater circumference with small feathers, much like a shuttlecock. This he places at the end of the longer spear and presses it under the water, until down the full length of the handle. A skillful jerk detaches this cone-like affair from the spear haft, when it wriggles up through the water like a struggling fish. The savage with the short spear intends watches this deceiver. A salmon runs at it and spear like magic. Next in importance among the Stemone is the Oregon brook trout, Fario stellatus. Specific characters: head rather large, contained 4.5 times in total length, maxillary reaching a vertical line drawn behind the orbit. Color of the bright black, olive green sides, pinkish yellow belly, white, profusely speckled over the minute black spots. This trout lives everywhere, and is to be met in the lakes and rivers in Vancouver Island, in all streams flowing into Puget Sound, and away up to the western sides of the Cascades, crossing to the eastern side, and ascending into the valley of the Columbia. Again he puts in an appearance, climbs the western slope of the Rocky Mountains up to the summit, 7,000 feet above the sea level. There too he lives, always hungry and voracious. These trouts are very delicious, varying from the 8 ounces up to 3 pounds in weight. My first exploit in fishing for trout may be worth relating. I was sitting on the bank of the stream that rippled gaily on its rocky course, down the western slope of the Rocky Mountains, and which, here and there lengthening into a long sickle and curling around a jutting rock, lazily idled by the grassy bank, anon leaping a sudden fall and widening into a glassy pool. Butterflies gamboled and flitted recklessly. Dragonflies clad in brilliant armor, waged cruel war on the lesser forms of winged life, chasing them everywhere. The busy hum of insects, the air fragrant with forest perfumes, the murmur of the water, and the songs of feathered choristers made one feel happy. Though far away from the civilization, my reverie was broken by a sudden splash, a speckled tyrant lurking around under the bank on which I sat, had pounced upon a very, very large gray fly that, unconscious of danger, had touched the water with its gauzy wings. Very well, Master Trout, you may perhaps be as easily duped as your more cautious confails. So setting to work, I overhauled my possible sack, found a few coarse hooks and a bit of guts and some thread, among other materials wherewith to make a fly. Feathers were indisputable. Shouldering my gun, I strode off to look for a white flesher. Alas, ruffled grouse soon stirred one up, bagged him, hauled off his glossy bottle green frill, selected some feathers which I thought would turn a decent hackle, picked out a couple of brighter ones for wings, some red wool from my blanket for dubbing. With these materials I tied a fly. Not the slightest resemblance, fancied or real, did it bear to anything ever created, but still, it was a fly. And I had handed myself a great achievement. A line was made from some ends of the cord. Then, cutting a young larch, I made my tackle fast to the end, and thus equipped the sallied to the stream. My first attempt in the swift score was a lamentable failure. Warily, I drew my newly created monster well across the stream, and according to the most approved method, let it slowly wash towards me, conveying to the rod and line that a delicate trembling tremble. Not a rise, not a nibble, my hopes wavered, and I began to think these trout wiser than I had given them credit for. I tried the pool as a last chance, so leaning over the rock, I let my tempter drop into the water. It made a splash like flowing in a stone. But imagine my delight, ye lovers of the gentle art, when a tremendous jerk told me I had one hooked and struggling to get free. Depending on the strength of my tackle, I flung him out on the bank, and admitting all that may be said against me as being barbarous and cruel, I confess to standing over the dying fish and admiring his brilliant color, handsome shape, fair proportion, and, last though not least, contemplated eating him. I pitied him not as, flapping and struggling on the grass, his life ebbed away, but thought only of the skill I had displayed in duping him, and the feast in store for me on returning to camp. Having discovered his secret, I pressed eagerly on to turn it to the best advantage, and that day played havoc amongst the trouts. Some long willow branches cut with a crook at the end served me in lieu of a basket. Passing the sticks under the gill covers and out the mouth, I hung trout after trout until the sticks were filled. Then, tying the ends together, flung them across my shoulder and trudged along. A good plan when you have not a basket. I now turned my attention and devoted all my ingenuity to the manufacture of a more angler-like fly. And in this case, the adage proved true, that a poor original was better than a good imitation. My well-dressed fly was not one half as much appreciated as the old one. There was a sham gentility about him that evidently led at once to suspicion. And it was only here and there I met with a fish weak enough to fall victim to its polished exterior. I therefore abandoned the dandy, and returned again to the rough old red-shirted crapper with which I had first commenced.